All right, we are back here on BCB Live, the safest station in the nation. Drive Safe Dave here, along with Sir Rick on assignment, and we also have Daniel Pickett, Chief Data and Technology Officer at Sonar. There's a lot to say there, but as Rick says, it is Chief Scientist Extraordinaire going on at Sonar. How are you doing today, Daniel?
I'm doing great. I'm tickled to death to be here with you guys. Long time listener, first time caller. So
That's right. Well, guess what? You get a hat. So we'll make sure that you get a hat sent to you just for that. So tell us a little bit really quick, Daniel. I know it says Chief Data Technology Officer over at Sonar. First of all, why don't you tell all the users, all the listeners today, what Sonar is?
yeah, so Sonar really was initially built as a platform to kind of expose other data that people weren't looking at. A lot of people are looking at kind of rates, surveys, and averages. And we said, there's a lot more interesting things out there that can tell you, before rates change direction and before, there's a shift in market capacity conditions. And so, we went out and started gathering information on kind of what's happening with the contract, electronically tendered loads, gathered what's happening on, maritime containers and at the ports and clearing customs. So a lot of these things that are upstream of the rate that actually happens, when a spot load gets moved or when a new set of recontracting comes through, just to help people kind of be a few steps ahead of kind of day of booking and what they're seeing in rates.
Hey, Daniel, when it comes to that data, and I talk to people about data in general, you think about it, the data that we use today, you're not going back 2 decades, right? It's
No.
pretty new data. And talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. A lot of the data providers that we work with have never sold or distributed data before. And so, there's a pretty big effort. People say data is the new oil. Well, if that's the case, we see ourselves as a refiner who's taking that raw information, fresh out of the ground and kind of distilling it into a product that can, do some good and help you make smarter decisions in your transportation, whether you're on the shipper side, whether you're an intermediary or whether you're, a carrier, both enterprise down to the one man, one truck, single operation. So yeah, we're kind of going in and looking at things that are early indicators of changes in volume, supply and demand balance, rate conditions, diesel prices, all these things go into ultimately, everybody says, rate per mile, I live and die by rate per mile. But that rate per mile is kind of that's the sum of all these other variables that are happening. And so what we're trying to figure out is what are those other variables? How can we detect changes in those before you actually see that lifeblood of, the revenue to the trucking company change?
And on that same thing, and right there, and Dave, sorry about that. So
Okay.
with Sonar, one thing that you try to do is try to show trends, today, because you're showing that, 3, 4, 5 year trends on a lot of this analysis. Yeah. I really want to talk about, say, the last couple of years, though, because, I think, in my opinion here, it's hard to go off historical trends right now because last year was the first year we've ever seen, a pandemic. And now it's the first year we've ever came out of a pandemic with a war going on. It's a lot of inflation. So a lot of weird trends. And it's hard to say what we are right now is what was happening last year because it's not the case. Was it the year before? Was it the year before that? How do you? What are some ways that you can use these trends to help them make sense to your business?
Yeah. So 2020 and 2021 absolutely broke all the historical models on what should happen with rates, what should happen with volumes. Like you said, we keep hoping we'll have a normal seasonality curve where the people who've been in this industry for 20 and 30 and 40 years say, well, there's a little summer peak and then there's the holiday peak, and that's how it goes. That's not what has happened, certainly in the 5 years that I've been studying data for the transportation markets. And so, how do you deal with that is really you kind of throw away seasonality-based models and you try to look at ultra high frequency data. And so instead of looking at, things that come out once a month or once a quarter or, potentially are 1 and 3 and 6 and 12 month lagged, government data sets, you really have to try and drive down to daily data because that's how fast the conditions are changing. Like you said, pandemic happened. We thought it would be an absolute disaster. Everybody thought this was going to be an economic disaster. And for anybody who's in the services industry, so, concerts and sporting venues and a lot of restaurants, it was a disaster. But for people in the physical goods, all this money couldn't be spent on services. Meanwhile, the government was handing out quite a bit of stimulus through a number of different programs targeting businesses and individuals. And so that resulted in just this boom in freight. And we tried to move 50% more than we had ever moved before. Well, no, who's surprised that we had congestion at ports and we had, record-setting rates and inability to even get a truck at really, really rich rates. So that was a surprise to everybody who was expecting a really deep recession. Coming out of that, as we unlock, we think, okay, maybe there'll be another boom. But people, aren't getting that stimulus money anymore. They're starting to spend it on services again. And that has kind of had the opposite effect of what was expected. Really, the only way to kind of, when we're calling it predict, but maybe we're not predicting so much as we're just getting data from yesterday and using that to say, okay, here are the current conditions. Let's make a decision based on what we know today with the most up-to-date information that's available.
Daniel, when you talk about that, I think it's really, really excellent because even for the simple guys, the unsmartest guy in the room, I think Sonar allows us to identify that stuff when it's presented in that light. You don't have to have a whole team of people to try to understand that the data you're giving it. You've put it in pretty easy to read platforms that discussing these things, but be it fuel, be it rates and stuff like that, so that you can see these things, and you can also, if you're just the one truck guy or the two truck guy or the 5 truck fleet, you can actually make informed, educated decisions on what your next business model might need to be or how it might need to change effective today going into next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, you mentioned the small guy. It's especially important for them. The 1,000+ truck carriers of the world, they have really robust teams. We work with them. They have huge teams of smart people that are looking at their own data, plus some of our data, other data sources as well. And so it's their goal is to cherry pick all the best freight, all the best routes, all the best rates before the little guy ever gets a look at them. But really by paying attention to what happened yesterday, what's happening today in terms of volume, in terms of rates, in terms of diesel. Then that can let you play with the guys in the big leagues for sure, and that's important if you're going to be a smaller carrier. Who there are huge advantages being a smaller carrier. In many cases, that they can be some of the safest fleets out there. They can be some of the most the ones that don't necessarily have the time pressure, and the ones that may have more experienced drivers. So there's some great things about small fleets. But it's certainly to their advantage to pay attention to this high frequency data and what are market conditions and how do you put together those profitable trips? I mean, they got squeezed harder than anybody as volumes were coming down, rates started coming down, and then rates really sort of plateaued maybe earlier this summer. But you mentioned the war earlier, diesel was ticking up, and that just eats away at profitability, and they don't have these massive fuel purchase programs with the truck stops and massive fuel hedging programs. And important that they pay attention to all the information at their disposal.
Hey Daniel, y'all measure so many things out there at Sonar. I mean, from freight to fuel to ships to dry. I mean, you name it, y'all measure it out there on the Sonar side. What are some of your favorite, 2 or 3 tools that you use, and it kind of explain the importance of those tools to our listeners?
Yeah. So in many ways, our first hit was our best one. So the tender rejection index is still 5 years later one of the fastest to react to changing market conditions. It told us what was happening at the beginning of the pandemic. It told us what was happening back when the ELD hard mandate happened. And we thought, oh my God, there's going to be a capacity crunch. Nobody's going to get a truck. And turned out to not be that bad for a little while. And so it's one of our originals. It's still one of the best, one of the fastest reacting. I also think that one of our newer data sets is the maritime data. We call it Container Atlas, and so it's ocean booking data coming out of China. That's if you're in trucking, that data is probably 2 to 6 weeks before you're going to see it hit your market. But you need to be paying attention to that because when that takes a dive like it did back in March, and FreightWaves was warning everybody we're in for softening. That can tell you maybe it's not time to go sign up for a new truck and get a big payment when, we have equipment prices. Trucks and trailers are 3 times what they cost, 5 years ago or even 3 years ago. Those kind of things can tell you, is it time to hunker down? Is it time to be aggressive? And so, combining both the what should I do today, what market should I try to catch a load to, with longer term capital decisions is kind of how you become one of the smarter data driven fleets out there.
Yeah, I'm going to. I like what you're saying on that. A question I have. So let's talk about the containers. I remember when that report came out, and boy, there was a lot of fringe that FreightWaves and Sonar lost, right? Because sometimes people don't want to believe the numbers on that. A follow-up question to that, though, is do we have the data today that says how much freight, if we have taken back, resourced that freight from China to, say, Mexico, somewhere else, to the United States, to Central America, do we know what that difference is? I mean, do we know how much freight has been taken away from China and now moved to Mexico to kind of help us correlate, are we in a freight slowdown, or is it just coming from another part of the country, part of the world?
Certainly. So you absolutely do see shifting manufacturing to Mexico. Automotive is one of the big ones who has always had a large footprint in Mexico, but they were hurt especially acutely by the chip shortage coming out of China. So they're one of the ones that are keenly interested in getting as much closer to the end market as they can. We see a lot of clothing and even some electronics going to Vietnam. And some of that's capacity driven. Some of that's also tariff driven. The new iPhone recently announced, manufactured in India. So, all over the world, we see shippers, we see manufacturers looking for more diversity. I think the pandemic taught them that maybe they had too many of their eggs in one basket. And you absolutely see that in container data. And you even see that in some of the changes over time in trucking volume and even rates. Port of LA Long Beach is the bread and butter. If it's going from China, it's probably going to LA Long Beach. Although we do see more going through the canal and coming to East Coast ports now, because that line of ships was over 100 at one time, and you had no kind of certainty on when it would get to dock if you weren't reserving whole terminals. And so we definitely saw some alternative port use, but we are seeing shifts in volume and what lanes used to be the biggest and the highest paying. That's slowly shifting for sure.
So I know we got a few minutes left in here, and so here's one that I've been looking at for really probably really close, probably the last, say, 6 months, and it's becoming I feel like it's becoming a concern, but maybe I don't understand it completely. So I'm going to ask you, Dan, put you on the spot here. The van contract, the initial reporting of average base rate per mile. It's the then you have the final one, right? The VCR, PMF, whatever the final one.
Yep.
You have the initial one, and I'm going to explain it. You just tell me if I'm just way off on this. So the initial one to me would be, I compare it to, say, an RFP that's going out maybe first round. Those are the bids that are going back that we're looking at. We're seeing the rates. And then the final would be, this is what we kind of agreed to. So the initial tends to be up here, right? The carriers are a little higher at the beginning. The final means this is what we agreed to between the shipper and the carrier. And if that's the case, I've seen that initial bid just fall down the ceiling, meaning that the carriers don't feel that comfort level that they did earlier. And I'm just talking 6 months ago when they were saying 288, 290 a mile, now down to that 265, 269 mark on the initial one, which tells me rates are going to come down a little bit more, because once we agree to that final contract, we're all going to typically go under the initial. The only time it seemed to really be difference was last year during the pandemic, when we rated something and it still wasn't enough and we had to go even higher. Am I right? Am I wrong? Or,
the way we calculate it is a little bit different than what you said, but the end meaning, you're pretty much right on. So what we're really doing there is contract data kind of flows in over a cycle that large terms are 15 days. Some are 30, 45, 60, 90. And so as we get those contract reports, they trickle in, I would say some trickle in a week after delivery. Some trickle in 60 days after delivery. And so, that initial is when we have a little more than 2 weeks of data, we go ahead and put out, here's what we've seen so far in the earliest reporters of current contract rate movements. And then the final is after 45 or 60 days, I can't remember which it is now, when we receive most of the reports we're going to see on kind of contract price. And so you're certainly right that the initial is going to move faster than the final because it is on less of a lag. It's a less complete data set. It's a smaller number of reports, but certainly, these things, they do tend to be very correlated on a lag.
So as those go down, when we see these things go down or up, what effect does that have on the spot market pricing, or is there a correlation between the two?
I would say that the spot tends to lead contract, and what happens there is, as the spot market falls apart, well, brokers decide, hey, I can take, I might lose a little margin, but I can take some volume if I go in and undercut these guys on old contract rates. And so they go in and either sign a contract or say, hey, send some more of your freight to spot, and I can save you quite a bit of money. And I mean, if you want to look like a genius as a director of transportation at a shipper, all you've got to do is pay attention to spot versus contract. And if your budget is set on contract and you can take advantage of a lower spot market, without causing yourself quality of service problems, then you can be a hero to your CFO. And that's what I think you see happening. So as spot trickles down, savvy both asset-backed carriers and brokers will start to kind of undercut the existing contract. Savvy directors of transportation, remember, we used to be a 1-year contract cycle, and now it's the mini bid. And so, we see bids going out for 3-month terms, 6-month terms, and so they'll launch. There's mini bids launching right now. I talked to a large shipper and 3PL yesterday, and they're launching another round of mini bids because they said, hey, you know what? We can make this fourth quarter a little bit more profitable for us because it's time to take that transportation cost down and take that pressure off of inflation off of us, the company. Don't know how long it'll be before the consumer feels that relief, but hopefully soon.
One more thing here, Dave Dover. Sorry, you got to bear with me for a second. I don't get Daniel to myself very often, but here we go. So the OTVI, the outbound tender volume, we hear it. We hear, volumes down, volumes down, volumes down. Well, if you go back to your data, I'm going to say volume's only down compared to last year. It's still 20% higher than it's really ever been before. At close to that 12,200 mark, I think is where we start off today, as opposed to about 10,000 every other year.
Sure.
So volume doesn't seem to be down, right? I mean, it's higher than it's ever been. Rates, even on the spot market side, rates appear to be as high as we've seen them. Unfortunately, you have that fuel that's just killing that spot market rate. Right. I mean, driving that profitability down significantly. Right. It's not a rate problem. I don't even think it's a freight problem right now. There is freight out there. It's just not last year.
Yeah, you're definitely right about that. But also remember, when you go from 80 miles an hour to 60 miles an hour, it feels like everything's going to hit the front windshield. And so that's what I think we're feeling right now. Couple that with, even though the volume's 20% higher, over the last 2.5 years, we saw a record number of new registrations for drivers. And additionally, they were buying trucks and trailers at record high prices. The price of a used 3-year-old used truck is finally showing some relief, but what was triple what it was pre-pandemic. And so you have a significant number of new carriers who have an extremely high cost basis relative to the people who bought their equipment pre-pandemic. And so there are more loads, but there's more competition for those loads on the carrier side. And that's why you see so much pressure on those rates. You're right that diesel is supporting those rates because got to put gas in the truck. But certainly profitability is still challenging, but because of those new entrants with really high cost basis.
All right. Drive safe, Dave.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we also highlight, how do you get this data? We've been talking about it. We've been talking about it on FreightWaves. I want to make sure everybody that's here knows how to go get it, knows where to pick this up. Let the secret out, Daniel. We want to know what is the secret. Yeah.
If you go to FreightWaves.com, you cannot miss us talking about Sonar and how to get on that platform. There's a form that you fill out, and one of our account execs will contact you and figure out what's your use case of all the products and data sets we have, which ones are right for you. But FreightWaves.com, and you can't miss it. The guys have put my email address right down here. If you email me, I'll help you get set up as well. And we'd love to talk to you because we really have helped a number of fleets. The customer anecdotes at this point are too many to mention, and you've got certainly smart resources out there outside the FreightWaves sphere, like the guys here at BCB that are taking that data and kind of interpreting it and evangelizing it too. So always happy to talk to people about data.
Thank you, Daniel, and I appreciate that. Hey, before you get out of here, I think it's important that we ask you to do what we ask all our guests to do. We ask that you state your name, who you're with, and that you're watching BCB Live, the safest station in the nation.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation. I'm Daniel Pickett. I'm with FreightWaves Sonar, and you're riding with BCB Live, the safest station in the nation.
All right. Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate you, buddy.
All right. We do appreciate it. Thank you very much.